context, you'll never understand a culture. You'll never understand another group of people. All right. So let's get started. Lord, we thank you for another day that you've kept us. We thank you for the opportunity to be in this class, to learn about the people that you created. Lord, we ask that with the information that is given today be in line with your will and with what you want us to know about the people that you created. Lord, we know it's not our job to split hairs and separate the wheat from the tare, but that's your job. And Lord, we thank you for this opportunity. Prick our hearts, prick our minds, and may those inform our actions and behaviors. We ask for all these things, and we thank you for all these things. In Jesus' name, amen. Just want to reflect so far on the class. So we've gone through some pretty heavy stuff. Thoughts, comments, observations. Is the pace of the class okay? People, too fast, too much, because I get excited. When I get excited, I just go full throttle, right? So I just want to make sure that the pace is okay. All right, cool. So what I'd like for you to do is to, if you can get out a piece of paper for your notes. And I said before that context is everything. What do I mean by that? When I say that, or you hear me say that, what do you think I mean by that? Yes.
That is possible to fully understand anything without understanding where it came from.
If you don't understand where it came from, it's almost impossible to understand, right? So I don't know if you took a diversity class or something in high school, or maybe you've taken another class here at Bethel. What I found is that more often than not, we spend time talking about the thing as opposed to talking about the why behind the thing, right? So this is what Asian Americans act like this, or they do this. Latinx people do this, or act like this, or wear this. Scandinavians look like and act like this. But we oftentimes don't talk about the why. And I will tell you, if we can understand that why, then we can better understand why people do what they do and what it is that they're doing, right? So let's start with you. What I'd like you to do is we're going to do something. So the technical term would be a genogram. A genogram. A more common way to kind of talk about that is a family tree. All right, family tree. So what I'd like for you to do, to the best of your ability, is start with you, and I want you to go back at least 3 generations. So this is generation 1, generation 2, generation 3. So this will be your parents, this will be your grandparents, and this will be your great-grandparents. Now, and what I want you to do is I want you to kind of build your family tree based on that. Now, and when I talk about family, I mean all forms of family, right? So adopted families, grafted families, blended families, however your family has been formed, I want you to create your family tree going back 3 generations. So that would be aunts and uncles, so forth and so on. So I'll give you just a couple of minutes to get started on that process. All right, so 3 generations. And if you don't know people's names, that's fine. You can say, just give their title, like, great-great-grandma or whatever, right? So go back 3 generations. You can graph it, you can write it out if you want. I prefer to do a kind of a graph, if you will, like this is my mom, this is my dad, and those are his people, these are my mom's people, so forth and so on. These are my siblings, so forth and so on, right? Here's my dad's parents, so forth and so on. So whatever makes sense for you. All right. As you're completing this tree, what I want you to do is I want you to put a star next to any person that is talked about by your family a lot, that this gets discussed a lot, right? And that can be someone who is um, who's a positive, gets talked about positively or negatively, right? So who in your family, put a star next to a person or any number of people who big family stories center around, whether they're positive or negative. Put a star next to those individuals. All right. Of those individuals that you've starred, select one of them. Select one of them. And I want you to just write down what are some descriptors that are used for that person, whether they're positive or negative. So pick one of those people, and what are the descriptors? Were they a scoundrel? Were they a hero? Were they honorable or horrendous? What words are used to describe that person? All right. Looking at that same person, if you have an awareness of where they grew up or where they were developed, right? Where these characteristics that they're now known for were developed. So were they out of the United States? Were they in the United States? Were they in a state of war? Were they in an urban area, a rural area? Where do you think those, as far as you know, so you're the family anthropologist at this point, right? As far as you know, where did those characteristics develop? What environment did they develop in? All right. Last question, and then I'll leave you alone. What time frame or what decade were they in where these things that they're noted for were actionable? So either at what age or what time frame? So was it the 60s, the 70s, the 80s? Were they in their 20s? Were they 10? Were they in their 90s when the words that applied to them were formed? So what decade, what time period were they in? What season of their life, if you will? Great. So what I want to tell you about the genogram and how that differs from a family tree is that a genogram really looks at the relationships between human beings, right? So when we look at a family tree, we're just looking at people's birth relationships or their biological relationships. Genograms really try to look at the deeper level of the nature of relationships or how those relationships play out, right? So, and this is a tool that therapists and social workers use to really try to look at some systems kinds of things in families. We can do the same for organizations, but that's a whole different kind of thing. So this is really, genograms really focused on individual relationships within a family system. So what I'd like for you to do now, and we're going to come back and dissect this later, but I'd like for you to get into groups of 4 and share your observations given the questions that I've asked about your family. What I will also suggest is that we feel free to share what we want to share and not to share what we don't want to share. All right? And we also recognize that what we're talking about is very personal and may be dear to us. And so I want to give the kinds of respect that I want to receive, right? So I'm going to ask you to break into groups of 4. Break into groups of 4. I'm going to give you each about a minute to kind of talk about your family tree. So that'll be 4 minutes. I'm going to ask you to keep time for yourself. I'll keep time for the class. And so a minute apiece. And make sure that everyone has an opportunity to share what they want to share. And you don't have to share what you don't want to share. All right? Cool? All right. So I'll set the timer up and feel free to organize yourselves accordingly, right? So groups of 4. And actually, you guys did that.
So, tell you about okay. So I've got three sisters.
So it's yeah,
She grew up here and now she's in me, John, yeah. So on my mom's side, 2 moms. Everybody except me had 2 children. Grandma and grandpa on that side. Dad's side, there's 70 people from my grandma and grandpa on that side. Remember all their names. Really big family. My grandma and grandpa. My dad started so it was in February, with the light. I just think it's really cool. It's the hardest thing. Somewhere that people talk about, tell these stories. They didn't grow up in the communities. They had to shovel it. And it's been about innovation.
like it was like a 5-minute conversation. I just remember like yeah, I was really actually active conversation for after like your change after like I was like trying to remember whether you wanted. Family gatherings like minimum. Somehow I thought like what is Dutch tradition? Yeah, but it's like Dutch tradition.
Where the boys in Brazil.
Like that's all that I know. To me, when it's like right together and there's like
Great. All right. Did everyone have time to share? All right. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So as you were sharing, or you were listening to other people's stories, what came up for you as you were listening to other people's stories? Yes.
We actually had a very similar situation, which I found interesting because I thought my situation was kind of somewhat unique, but we actually had a pretty similar situation, so I thought was interesting.
Huh. You found that you had a similar situation. Cool, cool, cool. This is one thing I do want to say. It's been almost, no, it's not quite a year, probably about 8 months. So the Walker Art Institute, is anyone familiar with the Walker Art Institute? Right. So they had a big fiasco with their sculpture garden. Did anyone hear about that fiasco? Right. What was the nature of that fiasco? The problem with their sculpture garden.
Is it the Native American? I don't remember exactly. They did something that I don't remember exactly.
Okay, no, but you're close. You're really good. Yes.
It's like a sculpture of the gallows.
Yeah. So they purchased a sculpture that had been world renowned. So it had been all through Europe and had got lots of praises. And what the artist did was he was looking at the hypocrisy of, or he was trying to demonstrate through his art, the hypocrisy of capital punishment, right? And so he took a number of famous executions by hanging and put them in this display. He took things from a number of different places. One of the places that was problematic was he depicted the Dakota 38 in his, or he wanted to represent the Dakota 38 in his gallows. And the gallows is the stand that they put people on and then drop the bottom of. You've seen movies, right? So that whole thing. And they wanted to make that into like a play park, swings and putt golf and that kind of stuff, which I find interesting, as a choice, but whatever. But their problem wasn't so much in doing it, but the problem came because they were doing it without having a relationship to telling somebody else's story, right? So the Native American community was upset because this guy was telling his story without having a connection to them. It was an accurate story. He wasn't inaccurate in doing that. But what was his problem? He didn't have a relationship, right? And so the Walker kind of got dinged on that because they wanted to do the right thing, but they didn't have a relationship, right? So what I'd also say is don't tell other people's stories unless you have a relationship, right? So don't tell other people's stories, but you can tell you're learning from their stories. Okay? So other things, what did you learn about yourself as you were listening to other people's stories? Yes.
Since mine was like a positive reflection, I feel like I started thinking about experiences with the person I was sharing about. Think like, oh, like that's the reason why I wrote strong, or that's how now I feel like I can tell a million other stories about this person.
So you started finding examples of the thing that had been presented to you. about them. Okay. Cool. Other folks. What you discover about yourself. So who were some of the people that get talked about a lot in your family system? Who are those people? Excuse me. Who are they?
Grandparents.
Your grandparents. Okay. And who all had grandparents as some of those people? All right, cool. Why? Why do you think they get talked about?
They've been around the longest.
So they've been around the longest. Okay. Cool.
Sometimes they're not here anymore.
Sometimes they're not here anymore. And what happens to people once they die? In terms of how we talk about them. Yeah, they become legendary. I've never met a mugger whose mom said on his deathbed, he was such a great mugger. No, they usually say, he's such a great person. I don't know why this would have happened to him, and blah, blah, blah. Have you ever noticed that? I don't know. I remember I had a cousin who passed, and they were burying him, and they were saying all this good stuff. And I was like, who are y'all talking about? Like, that's not who I knew, whatever. But. So what kinds of words were used to describe your most infamous or famous person in your family? Yes.
I use selfish.
Selfish. All right.
Hardworking.
Hardworking. There's some other words. Funny. Compassionate. Did anyone have any of those family members grow up outside of the United States? Were any of those family members involved in a war of some sort? How many of those family members were in urban areas? How many were in rural areas? So we go to family tree, but I'm really trying to get to this genogram. Why did I ask questions about where people are or how they were developed? What do those questions have anything to do with? Yes.
They get to the why instead of just the what.
They get to the why and not just the what, right? So I love my grandmother, and you'll hear me talk about her probably a million more times, and hopefully you'll love her as much as I did. Loved her, my favorite person. My birthday is actually 7 days after hers. I mean, a lot more years in between, but that was my person. I don't know if you have a person, and if you don't have a person, get one, right? She was my person. Love my grandmother. She would do great stuff with us. We play dominoes and Yahtzee, and we do puzzles. And in the 70s, there was this big craze called paint by numbers. And so you would get these paints, these oil paints, and mimic, the great masters by, the kind of colored in the dots, right? Like the new color books now, right? They have all these color books. So we would do that. I love my grandmother, loved her. But I also thought my grandmother was nasty. She would do gross stuff. So my grandmother was also pretty proper. in that there were certain ways she wanted things done and ways that she wanted to appear in the world. And if my grandmother could wear pearls and white gloves every day, she would have, but they would have gotten dirty. And so she was like, it's not worth it, right? So we'd have tea and toast for breakfast, or tea and English muffins for breakfast. And my grandmother would use the saucer and the cup, like, and I didn't know that. I mean, she taught me this, but the saucer actually is supposed to go over the cup to keep the tea hot, and then you remove it and put it under when you don't need it. Didn't know that till my grandmother taught me, right? So she just wonderfully exquisite woman, but she would do gross stuff. For example, I would be over there and she'd be making breakfast for us, and sometimes she would open up the jelly or the jam, as she liked, preserves, if you will, right? And there would be mold inside the jar. And you know what my grandmother would do? She'd get a spoon, scoop it out, throw it away, and then serve the rest of the jelly. Ooh. Or she'd go to make us a sandwich, and there would be mold on the cheese. And you know what my grandmother would do? Cut the mold off and serve the cheese. I used to think that was so disgusting. So I would always want to spend time over there, but I didn't want to eat over there, right? So I'm starving myself, because I didn't want to, whatever. But that's what my grandmother did. For years, I thought that was just her little quirk until she died. And it's so funny. I'm mad at people because I don't want people to do this to me. Don't tell all my good stories and my bad stories when I'm dead. Tell them when I can defend myself, right? So people are telling stories about my grandmother, and I'm like, that's why. Why do you think my grandmother did those interesting things? Cutting off the mold off the cheese and scooping out the stuff. She grew up in the Great Depression. You didn't throw anything away in the Great Depression. You made it work. You saved everything. My grandmother saved everything. She had trophy. She had bowling and Toastmasters, or mistresses back then, which is funny. Trophies out the wazoo. I never gave any of those trophies away. Had newspaper stacks all over the place. But if you didn't understand why my grandmother did those things and grew up like I didn't understand, I didn't fully understand her. Context is everything. And I would submit to you that whether someone is a hero or they are a hustler, whether they were good or bad, has everything to do with the context that they had to adapt to. And to adapt to. I don't know if any of us are anyone serving in the military right now. No? Okay, cool. I never served. I can't imagine what it must be like to be trained to take another person's life and then to actually have to do it. So yeah, so people come back with some PTSD or being in extremely stressful situations where they know the likelihood of dying is higher than the likelihood of living. I would imagine that does something to the brain. Context is everything. So why am I trying to drive this home? This idea of context is everything. Why am I so focused on this right now? Yes.
Because if we understand someone's context, even if they're very different from us, we can understand them.
You can understand them. And cut people some slack. Cut them some slack. My Uncle Jim is a drunk. But if I had the life that Uncle Jim had, I would probably be a drunk too. And I say drunk as opposed to alcoholic because drunks don't go to meetings. So, Okay, never mind. It's a whole joke. Right? No, I would, I might do the same kinds of things that they did. God has blessed me not to be able to have to use those things, but I understand why they do it. I don't necessarily agree with it. I don't like it, but I understand it. And if I can understand it, I can help them. I can help them. Context is everything. So in your family's context, what were the three things that person that you wrote down or that your family talks about, what were they after? What were they trying to get? Three things, yes.
For me, it's a better life in the United States.
It's a better life for the United States. Yes.
Survival.
Survival. The three things we introduced yesterday.
Significance, belonging.
Safety, significance, and belonging. So your family moves to the United States to get what? Safety, significance, and belonging. Right? Now we may say it demonstrates itself in other things, or it's other ways. It may be survival, it may be whatever, but ultimately it boils down to these concepts of safety, significance, and belonging. And those are good things to go after. But in the case of my Uncle Charlie, who is an alcoholic, and he's trying to find safety, significance, and belonging in alcohol, what's his problem? Is he going after something that is good, that is noble, that is human? I would say he is. He's looking for safety, significance, and belonging, just like you and I are. What's his problem? Alcohol doesn't give him those things. So what's his problem? The methods, right? The methods. And so if I understand what people are going for, I might not understand or agree with the methods, but I understand what they're going for, so therefore I can help them. Change their methods. Are these methods working for you? All right? Questions, comments, observations. All right, so let's go to another concept. And I do want to clear this up a little bit about the human soul, right? So we know that the human soul is a physical body and the spirit. And when we're born, those things are intertwined. They're locked. They're locked together. But as we get older, there are things that drive a wedge between our body and our spirit. And they slowly make us separate those things. Do you know the process is called? What's that process called? Maturing. When you're a little kid, you hurt yourself. What did you do? You went to mom. Before you even got to mom, what'd you do? You cried. Why? Because everything's right there. You cry, you hurt yourself. Oh, that's a natural response. You're supposed to. You hurt yourself, you're supposed to do it. But what do we train young people to do? What do we train them to do? Don't display your emotions, particularly with males. Don't cry. Walk it off. Get up. You're anybody have family members that talk kind of like that, right? Again? No, you get up. No, that's driving a wedge between the body and the spirit, right? Another wedge is is racism, sexism, heterosexism, ableism, blah, 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 blah. We'll talk more about those a little bit later. But the one that I think is the most notorious is predatory capitalism. Predatory capitalism. What do I mean by that? What is predatory capitalism? See commercials, right? How many commercials have you seen that make you feel better about being human because you saw that commercial? Except for the Olympics, right? Right around the Olympics, every commercial is like, Gary Douglas, yes. Right? What are most commercials saying to you? You're missing something. And you need it. You're missing something, you need it, and what? We got it for you. We can complete you. If your hair is too straight, we got something to poof it up. If your hair is too poofy, we got something that'll straighten it out. If you're too tall, we got something to make you short. If you're too short, we got something to make you tall. We can add to this and take to that. Drink this, take that, and you will have, you will blah, 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 blah. What do we know about consuming things that complete us? Does it work? It doesn't work. We only have to look at avatars that teach us that this stuff doesn't work, right? Michael Jackson had everything. Took drugs, fell asleep, didn't wake up. Robin Williams had everything. Tons of successful movies, tons of blah, 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 blah. But those things don't fill your hole in your heart. Philip Seymour Hoffman, John Belushi, the list goes on, right? Of people who, Prince, that's the one that really surprised me. Prince died in an elevator alone. If the elevator tries to break it down, go crazy, right? That's one of his famous songs was about an elevator. And he dies in an elevator. So we know that material things don't make us happy. But if the world can convince us or trick us out of our humanity, we'll keep seeking after those things. And we know that moth and rust and dust doth corrupt those things, right? The treasures we have on earth get corrupted. And so we have to look for things that are eternal. And those things that are eternal are our relationships with one another, right? Our relationships with God. So the body and spirit get separated. And another example that I like to use is, so when I was in middle school, there was a television mini-series. This was probably the closest to like a Netflix dumping of a whole series, right? So 3 hours a night for 5 nights, they had this mini series called Boots. Now I think they rebooted it, or they tried to make it into a show or whatnot. But I saw it the first time, and that was enough for me, right? And every so often, middle school teachers or high school teachers would show segments and that kind of stuff. But it was so compelling that I remember it from the first time I saw it. And my parents were very interesting individuals because they thought this was an important thing for us to see. Because they had read the book by Alex Haley, and here's a dramatization of this. And actually, my godfather is one of the actors in the series. And so my parents thought this was an important thing for us to see, but they also, my parents wanted to be protected as we watched the movie. So my parents felt the need to be protected. And so when there were controversial spots, my parents would do something that I now find quite goofy, But this was how they protected themselves. So my parents would say, if something controversial came on the screen, cover your eyes. They wouldn't turn it off. They wouldn't say leave the room. They would say cover your eyes. And so as children, we would do exactly what our parents said, so that my parents were protected. And so we would cover our eyes just like this. Right? So my parents, we didn't have playback and all that kind of stuff. What's it called now when you're watching it and you can make it go back? DVR, right? We didn't have, obviously didn't have DVR back then. So my parents felt good about letting us watch this because we had covered our eyes, which is interesting, right? So, but there was one part that really spoke to me around this issue of the human soul. And it's early in the show, in the series, and they capture a young man from West Africa, and his name is Kunta Kinte, right? Played by LeVar Burton, who is now known as the Reading Rainbow guy, right? Take a look, it's in a book, a reading rainbow. I can do anything. Take a look, it's in a book, a reading rainbow. Right. I'm waiting for the musical to come out. Right? So I'm going to audition to be LeVar Burton. Right. So LeVar Burton is playing this role of Kunta Kinte, who's a young West African who's captured as a part of the economic system of slavery. Now, I want you to listen to what I'm saying specifically about that phraseology. The economic system of slavery. Economic system of slavery. So they capture him, they string him up in some straps, and they prepare him to enter this economic system called slavery. And so the conditioner takes this whip thing and hits him on the back. And he screams, ah! And the man has a set of questions. He says, what is your name? And the young man says, my name is Kunta Kinte. And the man says, no, your name is Toby. So he hits him again. And this continues on till both men are just absolutely tired. And so the man asks one final question. What is your name? And after receiving all of those lashes in front of all of these people, what is the young man's answer? My name is Toby. What happened? What happened for that young man? They broke him. That's an interesting phraseology, right? So my daughter's watching a Netflix series called Spirit Riding Free. And it's about a girl and a horse. Anybody seen that at all? Yeah. Am I right? It's about the horse. And the horse, all the other horses have saddles. They live in things. But Spirit is what? He's riding free. It's in the title, right? No horse, no bat. He cannot be tamed. But he's really smart horse, blah, blah, blah. He cannot be broken. So what does it mean to be broken? Conditioned. Anybody use hair conditioner? Those of you who raise your hand if you use hair conditioner. What is your hair conditioner supposed to do? This is interesting because language is important, right? What is your hair conditioner supposed to do? Make your hair soft and silky. Why?
You don't want frizzy hair.
Because you don't want frizzy hair. Why? What's that?
Frizzy hair is hard to control.
Oh, frizzy hair is hard to control because frizzy hair is your natural state. It's your natural state. So we want to condition it, control it, break it. I would say that the whipping post that we find ourselves in today is not a physical whip, it's a mental whip. It's a whip that says that you are not good enough as you are. You have to be something other than what you are. We suffer from something that I have termed as the God complex. And you'll see it walking around. You'll see it all over the place, right? This is directly related to this idea of the human soul. This idea of coming out of the genome. I mean, of your genogram, your family tree, all these things. We have a God complex, and here it is. Satan tricked Adam and Eve because he told them they could be what? They could be gods. He tricked them with the S. What they didn't realize is that they already had the S. There was just an apostrophe between the two. The difference, right? You can be gods versus gods. He tricked them with an apostrophe. He took out the apostrophe and he tricked them. And so this is what we say. This is the root of racism. This is the root of oppression. We say, if we cannot be God, so what does it mean to be God? It means I control everything. Everything goes exactly how I plan it to go because I am God. And what do we soon realize as human beings? We can't be God because we don't control anything. So what do? We go to the next best thing. If I can't be God and control everything, I'll be God and control you. And what happens when that doesn't work? When I can't control somebody else, or I can't control another group of people. You know what the third place we go to for control, for godhood? Ourselves. I don't know if you have friends. I have friends who are tatted up, tattoos all over the place, right? Piercings all over the place, holes all over the place, right? And have you ever asked them why they did that, or why they have that, or why they do that? Have you ever done that to when you ask them why? What do they tell you when you ask them why?
Because they wanted to.
Because they wanted to. Because they wanted to. Why? Because they want to mold themselves in their own image as opposed to the image in which they were created. I'm not saying that, you don't have the right to do those things or the right to blah, blah, blah. What I am saying is sometimes we have to ask ourselves, why are we doing that? Why do we do those things? I know when I taught middle school, I had kids who cut. I don't know if you're familiar with cutting or whatnot, but it was a way for them to not be zombies, to be able to feel, right? And until I was able to sit down and talk to them as to why, were we able to actually help them get some healing around those things, right? And a number of them would say things to me, and the same with other types of mutilization. So I would have kids that would pierce themselves and not go to a shop, right? So, sat in a classroom and a kid took a safety pin and right through his ear. I'm like, dude, like you can get so many infections and blah, 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 blah. But his demeanor, what he said about himself is, if I can't control anything around me, I do have control over me, right? you have control over me. And we also see that in suicide, that people say, I can't deal with those things. So I will resolve this. I will take this into my own hands. And I would often say that sometimes even suicides or cutting or whatever is a lack of us being Christ-like and reaching out to people and saying hello and engaging and being a part of people's lives on a regular basis. Just being kind to people could be the difference between them making horrible decisions and making really good decisions for themselves, right? So, cool. So I do want to talk about this idea, this cycle, because we didn't bring ourselves to this, right? So in each of these generations, what did they also have in those generations that we talked about yesterday? What did each one of those generations have? See if that rings a bell, right? What do they have? Starts with para and ends in Gan. That's paradigm, very good, all right? So a way of seeing the world, a way of interacting with the world. And what drove that paradigm? Their context. Right? The 1970s were way different than the 1980s. It's so funny. I remember when the Twin Towers came down. I was teaching a social studies class. The TV was in the room. The woman from the office said, "Turn on your TV." So I turned on the TV, and I'm watching this happen. And I have to interpret this for my middle schoolers, who are now grown folks and they got their own kids now, right? Which is weird. That's weird. I'm like, you actually were able to find? No, I'm just. So I'm interpreting this stuff. And I know at that point that the world changes. Everything changes when stuff like that happens, right? And so I'm just in middle schoolers trying to do that. So I have to now prepare them for a world that is totally different than the one that they just lived in a half hour before, right? So, terrorism and body searches and, all this kind of, stuff that we have to deal with now is because of our context. I have some editorial stuff that I can share about terrorism and stuff like that, but we'll fix that later. So let's talk about this idea, this cycle of socialization. Cycle of socialization. So in our early years, we get information from our parents and our family. We get their what? What are they giving us? Right? So they're giving us safety, significance, and belonging, and they're helping to temper or shape our paradigm, right? So we get their paradigm. What's the biggest problem with their paradigm? What's the biggest part of their paradigm? What's that? That they are getting their parents' paradigm. But what's the biggest piece of a paradigm? What you don't know, right? So I'm inheriting all of this stuff and I will submit to you that this, know the things that I know I don't know, or don't know I don't know, or those blind spots. That's what it means to be human. So you can't know everything, right? It was funny. I had a Bethel student who was we were talking, and he was like, "Well, I want to know this mystery, and I want to know that mystery, and I want to know this and that and the other thing." And I just laughed at him because you can't know everything. Because if you knew everything, you would be God, right? So no. Yeah. So I reconcile the fact that I won't know everything until the end, right? So we get their paradigm. We also get their, we get history, we get bias history, we get missing history, and we get their paradigm, right? And why are we missing pieces of history in our early years? Because our parents don't know everything. Our teachers don't know everything, right? Bias history means what? What does it mean to be biased? What does it mean to be biased? What does it mean to be biased?
Have a view that is some way skewed by your condition.
Yeah. You have a way. You have a weighted. You have a weighted way of looking at the world, right? And usually it's your context that's giving you the weight. So there are things that I prefer over other things because of my context. I am biased towards certain kinds of things. And we'll talk about how that becomes problematic in just a second. So all of those things happen in the early years, and then we engage in this process called socialization. A good way to think about that is learning how to act. I'll move in just a second. In the context. So socialization is learning how to act in the context, learning how to behave in the context, learning how to think in the context, right? Do your parents ever say to you, we don't act like that? We don't do that. They're trying to teach you out of their paradigm. These are the sets of behaviors that are common to us that we have found successful. Those other behaviors, other people might do those behaviors, but in this family, you're not going to have success acting like that. Right? Acting like that. So then we enter the socialization, and then these things get reinforced. And what are the agencies that reinforce all of the stuff in these early years or through this socialization phase? It's media in all its form. It is government. Oh, there's an N in there. And education. So the cycle gets reinforced through media, the government, and education. So the media, what is it? So Fox News, CNN, MSNBC are some of the leading news places, right? Do they tell the news? No, let me back up. What is their primary job? Let's go there. What's their job? What's that? To get viewers. For what purpose? To get money. From whom? What's that? Not the cable provider. Advertisers. Advertisers. So when we see things on the news, now watch carefully when you watch these things, right? Because it's so funny. So I love Alex Jones. Anybody know Alex Jones? He's a conspiracy guy. He does this thing called InfoWars, right? So Alex Jones is, we're living now in a trumped-up nation. Trump is trying to buy the world, just like we were in the Obama nation. The Obama nation. The Obama nation. He was a Muslim taking over the world. Now, this is the funny thing I love about Alex Jones is he has all these conspiracy theories and he swears like they're going to happen tomorrow, right? And I find it interesting that none of his predictions ever happened. Obama never came for people's guns. Obama, all that stuff. And Trump is not chipping people. He's not, I just think it's interesting that all these conspiracies, right? So at any rate, but right after he does this, right, he's like, they're going to come for you. They're going to come and get your stuff. They want what you have. And then right after that, they go to a commercial that talks about anxiety. If you suffer from anxiety, please take these pills. It may cause your liver to bleed. It may cause constant vomiting. It may make you dizzy and pass out while driving, but it will help your anxiety, right? What do they spend all their time doing with the show? Building up this anxiety. Why? So we can sell this anxiety pill, right? Now, oftentimes it's a little more subtle than that, but sometimes it's just upfront and like that. And I see it on CNN, I see it on MSNBC, I see it on Fox News. So we know that the media is not necessarily, they have an agenda. And most of their agenda is to sell something, right? The government has an agenda, and it reinforces the dominant socialization that we have. We are encouraged so much to be conformist. Our society only works because we conform. If the majority of us did not drive the speed limit, we would have a problem. But the majority of us do, and there are a few people who don't. And I saw you drive in this morning. No, just teasing, right? And then education systems support those other two. In education, and I'll give an example of how this gets played out. And the hope of all of this reinforcement is that you get to this place where it becomes internalized. And you can just by looking at the word itself, internalize, you recognize that they want it to be a part of you, right? They want you to believe it. They want you to take it in, to invest in it, to make sure that it continues to happen. And then so these things become internalized, and then we collude. We collude with those things. So we now become the gatekeepers of it. We now agree with it. We teach our kids, and then it becomes institutionalized. So it becomes institutionalized. This is just how it is. We can't change it. Folks have always been this way, institutionalized. This is just how it is. We can't change it. It's in our schools. It's in our government. It's in our blah, 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 right? So I'll give you a practical example of what this looks like, this cycle of socialization. What is the story of the discovery of the United States that's most commonly used to explain it? Columbus, right? 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, right? Is there some history in that? Yes. So my neighbor just got a new Porsche, and I'm trying to use the Columbus approach to acquire that Porsche. So I walked over to it the other day and I licked it. Because you know what happens when you lick stuff, right? It's yours, right? So that didn't work. So I went over to my neighbor and I said, neighbor, can I have the keys? And he said, excuse me? I said, can I have the keys? He said, to the Porsche? I said, yeah. You said, why? I said, because I'm discovering it. Guess what he didn't do? He didn't give me the keys, right? Yeah. So there's that. So how do we discover something that already belongs to somebody where people already are? How do we discover them, right? So that's the missing history. The bias history is that that the Italians were as wonderful and great as they were, but if Columbus was all of that, he would have been able to fund his own voyage and not have to go to Queen Isabella of Spain to get the money to go. Okay, so there's that. So there's that bias history. There's a paradigm that gets established by saying that these particular Europeans came to the New World before anybody else. Is that true? No. Who was here before Columbus? The Native Americans were already here, right? Leif Erikson and his boys are all trumping through Canada, right? Long before Columbus was even thinking about coming over this way, right? Who else?
So is the Chinese or in California?
Chinese were in California. Africans were in Mexico, right? So look at the big Olmec statue heads, right? So no, there are tons of people. People have been traveling all over the globe long before Columbus, right? But there's a certain kind of paradigm we want to establish, suggesting that Columbus and those particular Europeans were so great, right? And then we learn how to act with that information. And how does media, government, and education reinforce that? How does it get reinforced by media, government, and education?
Report it and teach it.
What's that?
They report it and teach it.
Yeah. So not so often now, but there used to be big Columbus. There was a Columbus Day Charlie Brown special, right? And I love Charlie Brown, especially that dancer that did this. Right? So no, they had TV specials on Columbus, doing great things and discovering America and all this kind of stuff. How does the government support that? Columbus Day. We give a day honoring Columbus. How does education support that? Yeah, people keep teaching it as if, and they teach it unbalanced. They have a bias history. Because I'm glad that Columbus did what he did. I'm glad that he was able to come over and make a way and show people how to create this wonderful country that we're in. But the truth be told is, as good as he was just as dastardly, right? He was just as dastardly because he was human. He was human. And why isn't this place called Columbusica? Because America Vespucci did what? He wrote the maps, right? He mapped out the United States. Columbus never set foot on the continental US. He only went to the West Indies. So how does he get? And the West Indies and the United States are not the same place, right? The only thing we have left in the West Indies is the US Virgin Islands. So he never set foot on the mainland. But who did? Spain did, Portugal did, right? So at any rate, and then we internalize that stuff, we collude with it, and we don't question it. When it becomes institutionalized, we say it's bigger than us. I'm not going to question that. I'm not going to answer that. If I say that, I'm going to be considered an outsider, blah, 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 blah. But there is an opportunity to break out of this cycle. And that opportunity comes when we become critical thinkers. What my parents taught me is not my fault, but it is my responsibility to check it and see, how does that work for me in my context? because they gave me stuff that worked in their context, but it might not necessarily work in my context, right? So, I don't know the last time I had a check or my checkbook, but my parents lived by it, right? I live by a card and I check my balance and that's it. Everything is reconciled on its own, right? So my context is different. So I have to interact different. And so I have to be a critical thinker because if I just went along with everything that was taught to me, then I would not be living out the reason that I was born. I was born to glorify God, but secondly, to expand my humanity in ways that my context requires. Right? Make sense? All right, cool. Let's do this. Let's take about a 7-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll do some more active stuff. Right? Cool. 7 minutes.
So I went to check out the quiz yesterday, and it's not like a button anymore. There's no button for it, but then when I clicked on this to turn it in, it said take the quiz.
Well, let's try it.
So like, you think this one?
No, that's the weekly reflection.
And it says attempt quiz and 7 and you drop.
Yeah. So, but, and I'll explain this. The way they don't have a journal function in Google. So I did all of the class reflections as quizzes.
Okay.
So when you click that, it'll allow you to type in your answers.
Okay, so if I already typed that, I can like copy and paste
Yeah,
it.
just copy and paste it.
Okay.
So there's that, but I want to
So
get back to
the quiz.
quiz.
I went and tried to like.
So let's go back up to the top. Let's go
Yeah, I
here
tried.
to quizzes and quiz.
The only answer that says quiz is 3.
Oh, okay. So I did delete it. So I had doubles. So I was trying to delete the
Oh, okay.
the extra one, and I did, obviously, but I think I deleted both of them.
Okay.
Class reflection. Let me just add that. I'll add it right back.
I'm trying to get
Okay,
today. Thanks.
no problem.
Super stupid at all.
Oh, yeah.
No,
Maybe almost makes you want to do it the whole time. You know, the interior painting. You bring 20 houses, you make $2 grand. All right. You didn't do it? So I want to start the other half of this. This is part 3. So we did raise the power of illusion, the difference between us, talking about the genetic differences between us. I want to start this, and then we talk about the story that we tell, how we talk about or justify our behaviors according to the kind of racial hierarchy that we have created. And so this last part really is about the impact of our racialized society, right? So what, and just off the top of your head, what do you think might be some of the impacts of our racialized society? What might be some of the impacts of our racialized society? Disunity. All right, so what does that mean?
So since everyone's identifying with what race they are as opposed to, like we've been talking about just being human, then we're separating ourselves into the group and not being the best human population we can be.
Right. Anyone planning on going to heaven? All right, cool, cool. Most people nodded their heads. That's good. That's good. Feel good about that, right? What's that experience supposed to be like? What's it supposed to be like? You get 7 virgins? No, that's somebody else. What's it supposed to be like? Perfect. Who's going to be there? Who? God will be there. Who else? Everybody will be there. So, everybody who is redeemed, right? All of the redeemed will be there. Will there be a north side heaven? A south side heaven? He's like, it's gonna be a south side, bro, right? No, there's not gonna be a south side, north side, east side, west side. It's gonna just be. What's the most segregated day of the week? Sunday. Is it Wednesday? That's your bowling night? No, just teasing. Right? Yeah, Sunday. Where do we go? Go to church. With who? Most of us were people who look just like us. That was funny. I was doing a training and I was talking about this, and a woman came up to me. Lovely white woman, lovely progressive white woman, right? Now, I heard that African Americans need a respite from white people, which is why they like to go to church separate from white people. They need a respite. I looked at her and I laughed. So, and the reason I laughed and then I helped her was because some folks might think that the church that I attend is a black church because there are black people there, but it's not. People might say that, right? What did this woman fail to realize in her comment, in her surmising as to why black people, and she didn't talk about her own people, she's going to talk about somebody else's people. What did she miss in her summation, in her critique? What was missing?
Knowing your church.
What's that?
Knowing your church.
Knowing my church. That was possibly missing in her critique. What else was missing? A relationship may have been missing, right? She's a stranger. I don't really know her. She's coming up to me, right? In a familiar way. What's missing in her critique? Context. Context is missing in her critique. What she doesn't realize. So the church that we bought, we bought it from Lutherans. It was called Trinity Lutheran Church. Beautiful building, beautiful stained glass, just wonderful. Great wood, built like a cross, how they just a wonderful, wonderful building. And she said, black people need a respite from white people. That's interesting. Because guess who's up on the stained glass? White Jesus. I can't get away from white people if I wanted to. Right? White Jesus, he cool too, because he got Paisley. I don't know how they did it, but Jesus got Paisley. Right? No, that's foolishness. What is she talking about? Respite. What's the context?
Your church was originally from a denomination with a lot of white people.
So there's a number of problems in the Christian church in general. and more so, and also in the Protestant church. And this directly relates to this stuff. So I hope you don't think I go off on tangents and I'm not relating to it. It relates directly to this, right? So one of the problems was, what was the tool used to turn people from this into a thing? What was it? What was the tool that was used to keep slaves under subjection or to rationalize slavery in the first place? The Bible. People use the Bible incorrectly, wrongly, diabolically. They used it, right? So then what happens to the religion? Does that go away? No, it stays. To the point that even when, and I don't know if folks are, Pentecostal or apostolic, but there's a rift between so-called Protestants in those kinds of ways, right? There's a group called the Assemblies of God. Have you ever heard of that group, right? Assemblies of God. And then there's another group called the Church of God in Christ. Anyone ever heard of that? The Church of God in Christ? At one point, they were the same organization. And then racism hit. Assemblies of God became white. Not so much anymore primarily, but they're breaking off from the Church of God in Christ, stemmed around racial issues. So there are Black people in the Assemblies of God and working in that thing. And in the Church of God in Christ, there are other things. There are white people who are engaged in that organization as well. So I don't want to say that, but I will say that this racial stuff has segmented and augmented us in ways that's not good for us. And so our Sundays look very interesting because they don't look like heaven. I went to a Hmong service, and my heart just melted. I was like, this is absolutely amazing. And the thing that was amazing is that these Hmong parishioners were of Mennonite faith. Now I'm saying to myself, how do the Hmong get hooked up with the Mennonites? Are you familiar with the Mennonites? That they're in the same kind of camp or the spectrum of the Amish, but they're way more liberal in terms of their interactions with the English, as they call us, right? They're a bit more modern in how they think, but very classical in terms of religious theology and dogma and stuff like that. Very classic, right? Classic Christian. So I'm wondering how do these monks get hooked up with this thing? But it overjoys my heart because I'm like, this is a glimpse of what heaven is going to be like. And so why don't we do those things? And I would say because we've been socialized to think a particular kind of way. We've been given a particular paradigm that our way is the way, and that other ways may in fact be wrong. So we don't do that stuff, right? Some churches use wine, some use grape juice. For whatever reason, we've separated ourselves and said one of those is wrong and one of those is right. And I don't know. It's not up to. I'm not a pastor. It's not up to me to separate the wheat from the tares. But I do find it interesting that even among people who have or believe the same faith, there's such division between us, and I think it's caused by this racial divide. And again, I believe that racism is sin. That excuse me, other forms of oppression are sin, and we know what to do with those things, right? So let me get this started. I will say that Tandon Dr. Tandon, excuse me, Berkey will be in to kind of do a session this morning with us. And so he's expected to be here right around 10 o'clock, 10:10 or so. So we'll stop this part of the video and engage him as he comes in to talk about service learning and why we do what we do. All right, cool. So we'll watch this piece.
Funding for this program provided by the Ford Foundation, a resource for innovative people and institutions worldwide, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Additional funding provided by these funders. It is all around us. It is an illusion and yet profoundly real. What we perceive as race is one of the first things we notice about each other. Skin, darker or lighter. Eyes, round or almond. Blue, black, brown. Hair, curly, straight, blonde, or dark. And attached to these characteristics is a mosaic of values, assumptions, and historical meanings. Even those of us who claim we don't believe the stereotypes can easily recite them.
The average person on the street thinks that race consists of differences in physical appearance. They also think that from looking at a person's physical appearance, that they can find out or know more subtle things about them. Race is not a level of biological division that we find in anatomically modern humans. There are no subspecies in the human beings that live today.
And that's quite shocking to a lot of individuals. When you look and you think you see race, to be told that no, you don't see race. You just think you see race. That, you know, it's based on your cultural lens. That's extremely challenging.
Just because race isn't a biological reality doesn't mean it isn't real. Being classified as Asian or Black or Latino has never carried the same advantages in our society as being white.
Race in itself means nothing. The markers of race, skin color, hair texture, the things that we identify as the racial markers mean nothing unless they are given social meaning and unless there's public policy and private actions that act upon those kinds of characteristics. That creates race.
Physical differences don't make race. What makes race are the laws and practices that affect life chances and opportunities based on those differences. If we look carefully, we can see how our institutions and policies have assigned racial identities and reinforced racial inequality throughout the 20th century.
And this is something I think that all immigrant groups experience in one way or another when they come to America, no matter what point in time it is, because they come to a country that has historically always been highly racialized. It's a country where race has its origins in slavery, as well as in the conquest of Native American Indians. So anybody coming from the outside after that point has to fit into this racialized society in some way. And it's not always clear how people are going to fit in right away.
At the start of the 20th century, as millions of immigrants arrived from all over the world, lawmakers and social scientists debated how all of them, including the new European arrivals, would fit into the hierarchy of races already here. They came seeking economic opportunity, freedom, and a future for their families. Of the 23 million newcomers between 1880 and 1920, the vast majority were from Eastern and Southern Europe. Immigrants often worked the hardest, poorest paying, and most dangerous jobs, along with the so-called inferior races already here: blacks, Mexicans, and Chinese.
Cities with enormous slums developed as the ugly side of industrialization. Ugly both in terms of the aesthetic of American cities, but also ugly in terms of the solidifying of class differences and class tension. As all of those things became apparent, the immigrant became the symbol for what America might be becoming.
By 1910, 58% of American mining and factory workers were immigrants. Like Mexicans and African Americans, Italians, Slavs, and Jews were often desired as laborers, but also feared, seen as promiscuous, lazy, or stupid. Some saw it as a racial invasion. Charles Davenport, a famous biologist, expressed those fears in 1911. The population of the United States, wrote Davenport, will, on account of the great influx of blood from southeastern Europe, rapidly become darker in pigment, smaller in stature, more given to crimes of larceny, kidnapping, assault, murder, rape, and sexual immorality. And the ratio of insanity in the population will rapidly increase.
And this is also a time when scientific race theory began to take off, and people began to look at society and look at groups of people in more racialized terms. So people were perceived as being separate races. So you had kind of a higher order of white races, which were seen as the Nordics, as opposed to what many of the nativists called the lower races of Europe.
There are various groups like the American Breeders Association, the Eugenics Research Association, who not only are doing research on various racial types, in this case, Hebrews, Slavs, Mediterraneans, what we would call now the Caucasian race. We break it down to 35 or 37 or 45 races for study. And a lot of the language was beginning to get at the idea that those differences were actually rooted in reproduction. They're rooted in heritable traits. They were heritable, they were biological, they were immutable.
The more the newcomers were forced into low-paying jobs and diseased tenements, the more these conditions were explained as natural consequences of their innate racial character. Biology was destiny. Which side of the racial divide you found yourself on could be a matter of life or death. Between 1890 and 1920, 2,500 African Americans were lynched in the South. In 1915, Leo Frank, a Jew living in Atlanta, was pulled from jail and hanged by a mob for allegedly killing a white girl. Writing about the lynching, a Black journalist wondered, is the Jew a white man?
Some historians have suggested that these new immigrant groups from Europe were in between peoples. They were in a transitional stage when compared to Anglo-Saxon Protestants, groups such as Italians or Jews were seen as not being fully white, perhaps. But when compared to African Americans or when compared to Asians, their whiteness became more salient, became more visible.
Could European ethnics become fully white and thus fully American? By 1910, a new term was entering popular culture to describe the transformation of Europeans. The phrase came from the title of a Broadway play by Israel Zangwill. God, said Zangwill, would melt down the races of Europe into a single pure essence, out of which he would mold Americans.
So when the Irish, when Germans, when Italians were coming and they didn't speak the language, didn't know the culture, the idea was they will assimilate into Americanhood. They will become American, which in the American tradition has meant white American. But that melting pot never included people of color. Blacks, Chinese, Puerto Ricans, etc. could not melt into the pot. They could be used as wood to produce the fire for the pot, but they could not be used as material to be melted into the pot.
Whiteness was key to citizenship. In 1790, Congress had passed an act declaring that only free white immigrants could become naturalized citizens. After the Civil War, naturalization was extended to persons of African descent as well. But it was the white citizen who had clear access to the vote, sat on juries, was elected to public office, and had better jobs. Whiteness was not simply a matter of skin color. To be white was to gain the full rewards of American citizenship.
In order to be a naturalized citizen in this country, you had to be categorized as white or black. And almost everybody who tried to naturalize, all but I think one case that went to Supreme Court, all of them were people trying to be categorized as white. So the court had to make decisions about who was white and who was not.
Courts and legislators had long been in the business of conferring racial identities. In the South, to enforce Jim Crow segregation and laws against mixed marriages, courts had to first determine who was black under law.
And here's where it really gets interesting. You got some places, for example, Virginia law defined a black person as a person with 1/16 African ancestry. Now, Florida defined a black person as a person with 1/8 African ancestry. Now, Alabama said, you're black if you got any black ancestry, any African ancestry at all. But you know what this means? You can walk across a state line and literally, legally change race. Now, what does race mean under those circumstances? You give me the power, I can make you any race I want you to be because it is a social, political construction.
In 1909, American courts had that power. That year, the U.S. Court of Appeals in Massachusetts ruled that Armenians, often classified as Asiatic Turks, were legally white. If Armenians could be designated white, what of the other so-called Asiatic races? Filipinos, Syrians, the Japanese. Could they also petition successfully to be designated white by the courts? and thus become Americans? In 1922, when Japanese businessman Takao Ozawa petitioned the Supreme Court for naturalization, many in the Japanese community believed his was the perfect test case.
Takao Ozawa came from Japan, went to the University of California at Berkeley for a few years, then moved to Hawaii where he had a family, and he applied to become a naturalized citizen in 1915. My father wrote his own brief and everything, and he was really devoted. He wanted to become an American citizen, and nothing would stop him. He was determined.
Japanese growers in California watched Ozawa's case closely. By 1920, a series of alien land acts prohibited many non-citizens from owning or leasing land. Without a legal designation of whiteness to make them citizens, Japanese immigrants could not have the full protection of American law, no matter how long they lived in the country. In his brief, Ozawa argued that his skin was as white as any so-called Caucasian, if not whiter, but he made a much more important second argument.
But his second argument was that race shouldn't matter for citizenship. What really mattered was a person's beliefs.
My honesty and industriousness are well known among my Japanese and American friends. In name, Benedict Arnold was an American, but at heart he was a traitor. In name, I am not an American, but at heart, I am a true American.
The articles would come out in the paper. I thought, oh, what did he do? You know, I thought only bad things came out in the paper, and I was kind of ashamed, you know, when I was a child. And it was just the way we were brought up. I didn't have any Oriental friends. My neighbors were all Caucasian. And so he was so determined to get us, well, when the time came to be American citizens. The Supreme Court ruled that Ozawa could not be a citizen. They said he was not white within the meaning of the statute and therefore not eligible to citizenship. And the court said, well, he's not white because he's not Caucasian, and Caucasians are whites. He did everything right. He learned English. He had a lifestyle that was American. He went to Christian church on Sunday. He dressed as a Westerner. He brought up his children as Americans. He did everything he was supposed to do. And yet he's told that he can't be a citizen because he's not white.
The court ruled that according to the best known science, Ozawa was not Caucasian, but of the Mongolian race. But the court would not be bound by science in policing the boundaries of whiteness. Only 3 months after Ozawa, the court took up the case of Bhagat Singh Thind, a South Asian immigrant and U.S. Army veteran who petitioned for citizenship on the grounds that Indians were of the Aryan or Caucasian race, and therefore white.
And he makes the scientific argument, having learned something actually from the Ozawa case, that he is Caucasian. He gets scientific authority to speak on his behalf, that in fact South Asians are included in the Caucasian race.
So here the court was in a bind because they were presented with so-called scientific evidence that Indians were Caucasian. And the court solved this problem by saying that it didn't matter what science said, so-called science. They actually said white is not something that can be scientifically determined, but white is something that is subjectively understood by who they called the common person, the common man.
It may be true, reasoned the court, that the blonde Scandinavian and the brown Hindu have a common ancestor in the dim reaches of antiquity. But the average man knows perfectly well that there are unmistakable and profound differences between them today. The same court that used science to determine whiteness in Ozawa 3 months before now refuted its own reasoning in Finn. Finn might well be Caucasian, the High Court said, but he was not white. The justices never said what whiteness was, only what it wasn't. Their implied logic was a circular one. Whiteness was what the common white man said it was.
The court often decided who was white and who wasn't based on whether they just felt that the person would politically fit well into the kind of society that we were trying to build. And sometimes it was pretty explicit that this is what the court was doing.
There was widespread racial views that Asians were undesirable, that they threatened to contaminate the American society. Basically, that Asians are too different, that they can never really become like the rest of us.
The consequences of the unanimous verdict in U.S. versus Thind were catastrophic for the Indian community. South Asians who had naturalized before the verdict were stripped of their citizenship and property. Vaishno Das Begai was a successful merchant who fled British tyranny in India to raise his family in a free country. After his American citizenship was revoked, he took his own life. He left a suicide note for his family and another for the public. But now they come and say to me I am no longer an American citizen. What have I made of myself and my children? We cannot exercise our rights. We cannot leave this country. Humility and insults, blockades this way, and bridges burned behind. For the Japanese community, the verdicts in the Ozawa and Thin cases were equally devastating. Now, as aliens ineligible for citizenship, many growers were unable to purchase or even lease land to stay in business. Thousands of acres were seized from Japanese immigrants and sold to white farmers. By the time the racial requirement for naturalization was finally removed in 1952, Takao Ozawa was long dead.
The notion that Asians are racially unassimilable and that they're ineligible to citizenship because of their race is something that I think has had a real enduring effect. The fact that they were seen as non-American enabled many Americans to see them as the enemy and to strip them totally of their civil liberties and to put them in internment camps during World War II. The legacy of this idea is that even those who are third or fourth generation Asian Americans are still perceived as foreigners.
In 1924, Congress passed the Johnson-Reed Immigration Act, which effectively banned Asian immigration until 1965. Johnson-Reed also cut immigration from Eastern and Southern Europe to a trickle.
Your blood's the same as mine. Mine's the same as his. Do you know what this wonderful country is made of? It's made of...
World War II found the U.S. at war with Nazi Germany and Japan. Films like the 1945 Oscar-winning short, The House I Live In, called for national unity and ethnic tolerance.
What is America to me? A name. And these other distinctions, which had carried so much power in an earlier period, Celt, Slav, Anglo-Saxon, started to fade away. They had no purchase because those distinctions didn't seem to hold the key to any social questions that were worth answering anymore. The more important and more pressing political social questions seemed to hinge on black and white. All races and religion.
Sinatra's song was one of tolerance, but the line that sang of "my neighbors black and white" was cut from the film.
Come on, man.
So we'll stop right there. We'll pick this back up in just a second. I think Dr. Burke is really going to set more context to a number of the things we've already talked about. And so what have you started to notice in the context that's being created in this film? For at least this particular part, what are they dealing with?
People are not, or Europeans are no longer identifying with their country of origin. They're just white.
So Europeans are no longer identifying with their country of origin. They're becoming white. And what else? And what does citizenship have to now deal with? What grants one citizenship? So that is the result of a system. What's the system that is granting? What's the system that is granting citizenship? What's that? Science is not granting citizenship. The courts. So now what has shifted is that our personal preferences have now become what? Politicized. They become a part of our legislative process, our decision making, how the country is run and governed has now become influenced by that particular way of seeing the world, right? So now whereas it used to be personal preference, or I like this person, I don't like that person, is now becoming institutionalized, right? Through legislative processes. We're saying legally, these are things. Anyone belong to a gym? You belong to a gym? Okay, what gym do you belong to? YMCA? Vertical Endeavor. Oh, sweet, you're a climber. And I belong to Lifetime. Because I'm bougie. Right? So I belong to Lifetime. Now, here's the interesting thing about that. Can I go to Vertical Endeavors? I can go without a membership. I have to pay. But as a member, you also pay, right? Yeah. Right. So is my payment the same as your payment because you are a member? No. So I would pay differently than you would pay, right? How long can I hang out at Vertical Endeavors with my one-time payment? Until they close. So I can stay there all day. So if I go on Monday, can I come back on Tuesday with that same membership? No. Why? Because it's just for one day. So as a member, how often can you go? Every day. Stay all day if you like, right? And go any day of the week because you are a member. So you have freedom as a member. Why does this stuff become important? Because what we're talking about is who is an American? Who has membership? But here's something I want you to think about. We talk about freedom and we talk about, let me know when you're ready, sir.
You keep going.
Okay.
I'm ready whenever you're ready.
Okay, cool. Because then I'm gonna slide right into your presentation. So who is a member is then becomes the question. And we define by law who membership is. And what does membership give you? It gives you rights. It gives you access. It gives you all of these things. But if we can say who people who are not members, we limit their what? Their freedom, their access. Right? So we'll talk later about the difference between freedom and liberty, because the founding fathers talked about liberty, not freedom. But we'll deal with the difference between those two later. And so what we understand is that through this legislative process, we start giving access to some folks and limiting access to other folks. That we start dividing these things, and we use laws. And what we use objective thought to do these things. We don't do them out of malice. We don't do them out of hate. We use objective thought. And typically we refer to the law as being objective. And what does that mean to be objective? What's objective?
Neutral.
I'm neutral at best, right? Or I'm above petty thoughts. I look out for the best of everyone. But what we recognize is that, and I'll say this and then the floor is yours. And people get upset when I say stuff like this. So I understand it, right? So I believe that communism is a good political tool. I believe communism is a good political and economic tool. I believe that socialism is a good economic tool and philosophy. I believe that it's good. I believe that capitalism is a good economic philosophy. And I believe that democracy is a great philosophical, political tool. I believe that they are great. I believe that all of those are great. On paper, when do they not become great? When you add people. When you add people. So we can't be objective. And so oftentimes, and we're going to talk right now about laws and ways in which just here in the Twin Cities area, we said we're going to do the best for all people because we're going to be objective and give everyone what they want at the sacrifice of somebody. Right? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're also going to talk about this idea of why we do, what is the philosophy of Bethel? Some of you have done Z tags before, right? And it's so funny because a number of people are like, I have 7 Z tags. I'm like, go ahead. No, not quite 7. I'm exaggerating. But there's a philosophy behind why we want our students engaged in the world. And what do you think? And I'm not going to spoil anything for you, but what do you think that? Given that this is a Christ-centered educational experience, why do we want you engaged in the world? To share the good news, right? To be salt and light. But there are also some cognitive things that we also want you to gain through that experience. So, Dr. Berkey, thank you.
Well, I'm Tanner Brecky. I get to work in the office of the Bethel Frogtown Seminole University Community Partnership. So my role here at Bethel is helping bridge university and community partnerships. And one of them is through classes like this class, doing service learning. So today, what I would like to do for the next about half an hour, all right, we get you done at 10:45, right? So next half an hour, what I like to do is lay that a little bit of a groundwork for some of the basic logistical things when it comes to service learning that we need to be aware of, and then talk a little bit about the Frogtown Seminole University communities and give you a little bit of background on those communities in the context. I love the idea up here that context is everything. So as we think about community engaged learning, understanding the context in which we're moving into is absolutely critical because I've already talked about that. So that's why we're going to do a little bit of that historical contextual analysis this morning. But to begin with, I'm going to give a little bit of a background on for when we do community-based learning here at Bethel, or service learning. Okay, those are kind of interchangeable words in some ways. Here's a couple of things that are important for us. This concept of the Bethel Frogtown Community Partnership was developed 19 years ago. So you enter into this experience, you're entering into a long legacy of the Frogtown University neighborhoods and Bethel engaging with one another. And here's how we describe this partnership. The Frogtown University neighborhoods in St. Paul, so those are two neighborhoods in St. Paul right after University Avenue, and Bethel University have joined hands in a unique partnership of learning. This is fairly unique as far as universities go. Not many universities across the nation have this kind of partnership. It's a partnership based on three really important ideas for us: trust, accountability, and reciprocity. Designed to be long-term, this partnership is building unity among a diverse community. So those three words there: trust, accountability, and reciprocity. Trust, we come together once a month with our community partners and faculty and staff from Bethel. We have a shared meal together, and we talk about the partnership. What's going well? What are our challenges? There's an opportunity for us to build trust with one another. What we say, we mean. What we say, we do. And when we're not able to do it, we acknowledge those shortcomings. Hey, what we thought we could follow through on, we're not able to because X, Y, Z, right? So it's this open relationship back and forth with the community partners and Bethel. That the trust and accountability are kind of interlocked along with one another. That as you're accountable, open and honest, and build trust with each other. But the last word here is this reciprocity. And for us, reciprocity, another way to talk about this is mutually beneficial relationships. These are relationships where the neighborhood, Frogtown and some university, they have tremendous assets, right? And those assets benefit Bethel in all kinds of ways, creating rich learning environments for our students. At the same time, Bethel has some assets that are very beneficial to the community. For instance, last semester, we had students in a film class develop two promo videos for community organizations, right? So there was tangible product. You guys will be working in educational contexts, most of them, not all, but a lot of educational contexts, providing support to the classroom and teachers that are running those educational institutions. So you're, again, providing a valuable resource to the community. But it's back and forth, both of us. We don't like to use the word help, because help oftentimes has a connotation of a power dynamic, that one is helping another. The helper is helping the helpee, and helper is the one who's powerful. For us, both the neighborhood and Bethel are powerful. We both have assets that we're trying to contribute to one another. As students enter into service learning, here's a service learning cycle that I want to shoot out to you to think about, to help frame up this experience. It starts with having an experience in the neighborhood, right? So each of you are working at a different community organization. That moves to sharing and doing some general reflections, kind of the what that you're experiencing. So some of that will happen with some postings that you'll do, some class discussions, but you're more descriptive kind of work in this first part of the reflection cycle. As you do the descriptive work and reflecting on the what, you start to do some processing, the so what, processing and generalizing, right? So you're starting to ask deeper questions about, why does this matter? What's the significance of what's going on? What's the nuances in this particular environment? What's not so obvious on the surface, but what's below the surface here? And then out of the so what, we start to move to the now what, or application. How does that impact practice? How does that impact what we do? right? For this class, educational equity, we're thinking about particularly how does our service learning experiences impact teaching practices, school structures. How do different communities, different populations get access to quality education, right? All of those things have to come into play when we think about the now what. So I want you to be able to go through all three of those phases as you're doing service learning. You're doing the descriptive work with what, the more analysis around the so what, and the application of the now what. And because this is only a month, the now what is probably going to stay more in the abstract. It'll probably manifest itself more as you enter into the teaching vocation, you start to work in schools, but you can start now thinking about the what. I mean, there might be some ways that you can bring some of that into practice, but most of it will probably be done later. I'm going to skip over that quote by Koen. Here's a couple really pragmatic things that help students when we think about service learning. We talked about the mutually beneficial relationships, and here's what students can do to make that possible. Both of these lists kind of mirror one another. The first list over here talks about being flexible, being on time. So when you go into an organization, there might be some dynamics where you need to flex your hours or the kind of work that you're doing. I need you to be able to do that. Being on time is critical. These organizations are expecting you to be there when you say you're going to be there. If you're not, please contact your site supervisor to let them know what's happening. Being committed for the whole time, you're only there for a month. So it's absolutely critical that you fulfill that whole commitment. And while you're on site, asking questions. People don't expect you to know all the answers. You're there for a month as a new context. Ask those questions. Your site supervisors are more than willing to answer those questions. And give it your best. No one expects perfection. People at the organizations we're working with just expect you to contribute, make a positive contribution. Do the best work that you can do, and that's good. Another way to say this,
is there a way, going back to your point around asking questions,
yeah.
Is there a spirit in which I should be asking questions?
Yeah, sometimes we can ask a question that can be more of a demand than a question, right? And so asking that question is saying, I'm not sure, maybe you already said this, maybe I missed it, but help me understand this. Or here's a situation that I'm confused about. What was my role in this situation? During the orientations, most of your organizations are going to lay out what your roles are, what the expectations are. But asking those questions and asking authentic questions, not making a demand with your question, becoming more, I'm confused and I need some help right now. And sometimes the way our questions are answered are not the way we want them to be answered. That's the way they're answered. And then moving with that answer. Okay. Another way we talk about this is the 4 agreements. So being impeccable with our word. I had 4 agreements, but only 3 of them showed up. Just confused it for a minute. Like, wait a second. Being impeccable with our word, what we say we do. Okay. Not taking things personally. It's not all about you. You're going to be in a context where it's different than your norm, and there might be some things that you don't understand or that are outside your cultural norm. Try to take that as personal. Okay. In a different context. Be flexible in that context. Also, not making assumptions, which see if we can make the questions over here. Okay, don't make assumptions. If you have a question, ask. And then this last one, do your best. Give it the best. That's what people are asking for. A couple other things as far as the context goes that I think is helpful for some logistics. I'm going to hand out some service learning safety guidelines. Yeah, actually, I'll just pass it around here. We can get that going on that side of the room. If you have some passes on this side. These are some guidelines that I think are helpful for you to think about when you're in these contexts, not because these are unsafe communities or unsafe organizations, okay? When I use the word safety here, that's trying to imply that these are dangerous contexts. What I'm saying is that these are contexts that you're not familiar with, okay? Contexts often are outside of the norm. And as you enter into that context, here's a few things to be thoughtful about, okay? A couple of the general ideas here that we ask is that you let people know where you're going and when you'll be returning, okay? That you're in communication with your fellow students and you're in communication with your site coordinator. Also, we ask that you have boundaries when you're in these contexts. So think about, you guys are preparing to be teachers. Think about this experience being a teacher in a school context and what kind of boundaries are helpful. So defending people on social media, giving out personal information about yourself, such as your cell phone, personal email, those kinds of situations. Don't do that. Not during your service learning time. Okay. I'm not trying to tell you to be standoffish, but not giving away that kind of personal information is important. Create those professional boundaries in the context that you're in. During orientation at your sites, some more of those boundary issues will be talked about. If you are fuzzy on those boundary issues, please talk to your site coordinator. They will have more specifics for you. But I've listed some in here. And I don't want to go over that anymore because of time, but please read that sheet there to be back over more of the service learning safety issues. All of you, today is Friday, so those of you who signed up for the application process should be well on your way with the orientation information. If you're not, you need to be in contact as soon as class is over with your site coordinator. Today, you'll also get an email to to register or to report your hours for the week. It's a Google form. You'll need to report your hours that way. I'll share that spreadsheet with Professor Koen. If you don't report your hours, you're not going to get class credit for those hours. So report those hours through that Google form. You'll get those every Friday, and then you'll also get one on the 25th. Okay, that's the last day of class. So you'll report your hours through that Google form.
And the hours that we report this week would be like our online training and orientation hours, right?
Correct. Yep. Yeah. So include those. If you do some orientation, if it's online, include that in your hours. If you did not sign up for the application, I shared with Professor Koen, there's 2 organizations that still had some spots open. You'll need to directly contact those organizations, Urban Homeworks and Central Community Services. And he has the site coordinator's contact info, so you can directly contact them if you're still looking for a site. Okay. Any questions about some of the logistics that we need to cover? I think the emails that I sent out were pretty explanatory along those lines as well. So thinking more about the specific context of Frogtown Summit University, here's a map that shows us what we're thinking of when we're thinking of these neighborhoods. This is University Avenue, right where the highlighter is right here. This is Lexington. So this is the boundary on the west of the 2 neighborhoods. This is the boundary, Rice Street is the boundary on the east. And then above University Avenue, this area right here is Frogtown. The northern border of Frogtown is this Pierce Butler, right through here. So this area is Frogtown. South of University, this area right here is Summit University neighborhood, kind of down here to Selby. So this is the Summit University neighborhood. As you look at this region right through here, what kind of stands out to you? I'll just keep moving my cursor around the boundary of that, but what stands out to you on that map? What do you see that's kind of hard to miss? Start shooting out some ideas. What do you see? What does this map really indicate? What's that? Yeah, hi. This highway right here, right? This major. What highway is this? Anyone know? Interstate 94, right? You got 4, maybe even 6 lanes of traffic flowing right through here. That interstate was built in the 1960s. Okay. What do you think happens when an interstate gets built through a neighborhood? At the time, this wasn't called some university, it was called Rondo. What do you think happens when an interstate gets built through a neighborhood? And why is that? People don't want to live there, and why would people like that?
Loud and crazy. There's construction going on at that time. It's not convenient.
Yeah. So noise pollution, physical pollution, the automobiles. What else? What else would be? Think about the construction idea. Yeah. Okay, and how does it divide the neighborhood? Like what does the construction happen?
Well, you can see the cross streets are split. So going north to south.
These roads right here.
Drive across the other side of the neighborhood.
There are a few roads that do, like Dale Street right here. That one does have a bridge across the interstate. But the roads on either side of Dale Street, they dead end. They don't go through anymore. So there's a lot of roads that dead end. What else might happen? House values go down. Why would house values start to go down? Back to this point over here. So it's an economic detriment to individuals living in the community. Think about the construction idea. So there's the inconvenience of the construction when it's being developed, but what else happens when you do this kind of major construction in a neighborhood? Okay, there's maintenance. Before you do the maintenance, what happens? Demolition, tear down the houses, right? So this is not just vacant land. These are homes, businesses. In order to build this interstate, there were upwards to 600 homes and 300 businesses. Okay, that's a lot of property. And the ways in which that went about, there were a lot of injustices that were done by the way that the city enacted eminent domain. There's a legal term there that allowed for the city to take possession of those properties. I don't have time to go into all that, but what I want to do now is show a short film. Marvin Anderson is one of the individuals in this film. Marvin was 16, 17 years old when the Interstate 94 was developed. And I want to show this film for a couple of reasons. One, Marvin Anderson is a primary source, right? So we know this history best through people who lived the history. So I want to hear it through his voice. I also want to show you some of the images of what took place so that we can get grounded in this experience, not just kind of an abstract idea, but we can actually see what physically took place. So the documentary is called Remembering Rondo. We're probably not going to watch all 10 minutes of it, but we'll watch a few minutes of this. As we do this, I want you to be jotting down some notes. Think about, I want you to do a 3, 2, 1. So write down 3 things that you see that are important in this documentary, 2 things that you see are interesting, and 1 question. So 3 things that are important, 2 things that are interesting, and 1 question that comes up for you. We won't get to all that today, but this 3, 2, 1 will help you as you enter into your service learning experience, right? I'll start to help frame this experience for you, and it will help you as you do some of your
reflections in class. Huh.
The St. Paul Echo was one of them. Earl Wilkins, brother of civil rights leader Roy Wilkins, was the paper's editor. 90 years ago this week, Wilkins said this in his newspaper about St. Paul's Rondo neighborhood. This is the spring of the year. The early birds and flowers are here as heralds telling us that it is time to clean up. We happen to live in one of the city's best locations. We are not on a weather-beaten hilltop nor on a stench-filled valley. Our streets are well curved and lined with beautiful trees. Such a neighborhood is worth keeping clean. Well, Rondo Avenue is long gone, buried under I-94. The neighborhood's loss is detailed in a new TPT documentary. And here's a clip.
This is all neighborhood. This is all where people live. Houses going all the way down Rondo. All this was community.
Today's sons and daughters of Rondo were children when the heavy construction equipment began moving through their community. The memories they share of their childhood homes, the final days in their parents' and grandparents' houses, and the feelings of loss and displacement are palpable.
The whole movement to build the freeway at my age was somewhat oblivious to it. And when it first dawned on me was when I came up on the house, there was a moving van out there, all kinds of squad cars, and all my grandma and grandpa's possessions were just, scattered. They were sitting, across from each other and they're just in a daze. He's a broken man.
We moved to another house. It was a smaller house, but it didn't have the grace, it didn't have the majesty that my father inherited from his Uncle Matt. 717 Rondo was a big house. It had a wraparound porch, 3 stories. It had stained glass windows, all kinds of red wood in it. It had a certain majesty about it.
I remember standing on the corner when they were tearing our house down, and it was very hurtful, and tears were running down on my family's face. We didn't want to move.
Whenever I walk across that bridge or I get in this neighborhood, I think about what lost at I-94 when they took my father's homes and they took the homes of everyone else who lived in this community of Rondo and Casper. So yes, I get nostalgic, I get homesick, and I get sad because a great community was destroyed by I-94.
And just saw Marvin Anderson is one of the sons of Rondo featured in the film. He's the co-founder of the annual Rondo Days Festival, which has done so much to keep the spirit of Rondo alive. It's good to see you. Thank you for being here.
It's great to be here.
I was telling you off air, a gentleman that I ran into today asked what it was going to be an almanac. I told him about this segment, and he said, Rondo, I've never heard of that. Now, where was that again? And that's got to be frustrating.
It is.
And obviously, there's still a lot of passion and sadness around the loss of this, it looked like a very lovely neighborhood.
It was. For over 70 years, it was a neighborhood that generated so much warmth, so much legacy, history, togetherness. It was a neighborhood that provided us with support and comfort. Greater St. Paul during the height of Rondo wasn't as welcoming as it is now. So we would go to work, we would go to work in the stockyards, work on the railroad, maids, ran elevators, did menial work. But when we got back to Rondo, we were somebody. We had our home, we had our church, we had our restaurants, we had a rhythm all of our own in Rondo. And when the freeway came and they wiped that away from us, we were left then to try to recreate that feeling within the city of St. Paul, and it just was not possible.
If people don't know the history, there was a northern proposed route that would have solved the problem without going through the neighborhood. I'm wondering if, this would have happened now, if the suggestion had been made now, wouldn't there have been so much more pushback?
Absolutely. We had a reconciliation ceremony about 2 years ago in the Rondo community. And we were fortunate to have Commissioner Charlie Zelli from the Minnesota Department of Transportation there.
And Commissioner Zelli made a statement that just resonated with so many people that were attending the ceremony when he said that based upon what they know now, they would never route a freeway in such a way that transportation planning has just changed the way that they approach people. They listen now and they learn. And we were so pleased to say he's learned from the Rondo experience. And that has affected transportation planning throughout the state of Minnesota and hopefully throughout the country. Because transportation, if planned wrong, can have devastating effects upon a community that last more than a lifetime.
And it's obviously in the documentary.
It is.
One of the alternate routes would have been Pierce Butler, which would have been far away from the neighborhoods. And I know this is in the documentary, but what was the reason given for folks who are not familiar? What was the reason given to go right through Rondo?
Well, there were a number of reasons, but we like to believe that in 1935, Rondo was designated a slum by the demographers of St. Paul. It was called a slum. And when the final decision was made, there was a cartoon that ran in the St. Paul Dispatch, and the mayor of the city of St. Paul was given a choice. Do you want this, which was a freeway, or do you want the slums? And the next frame, he's sweeping the slums away from the city of St. Paul. So there were transportation reasons. I imagine there were transportation decisions to do it, but there were other reasons that they made that choice to route it through the Rondo community.
We've got. I'll pause it there. What Marvin Anderson is talking about there is what you're learning about in the film Race, Power, and Illusion. They start to talk about redlining. I don't know if you guys got to that section yet.
That's the next part.
Okay, so the next part, when they talk about redlining, that's exactly what he just talked about there, that Rondo was labeled a slum based off of the redlining policies, which then enacted or paved the way for the neighborhood to be planned to clean up the neighborhood, right? To remove the slum by putting in this interstate. The other aspect to the Race, Power, and Illusion is Rondo was a historically Black neighborhood. And these decisions were made by a predominantly white government, right? So the race, the racism that you're learning about in Race, Power, and Illusion is getting played out right here in this neighborhood. So when you go into Frogtown Summit University today, I'm hoping that this history here will help shape and frame and help you think about the context in which you're in, right? This history, this neighborhood didn't just emerge out of nowhere. There's a history, a rich history. Some of the strengths of the neighborhood are built off that history. Some of the challenges the neighborhood is facing is also built off that history, right? So that construction of 94 in the 1960s is having a direct impact on the community to this very day. And that's not just me saying that. As Marvin Anderson said, the city commissioners have acknowledged that. Also, Mayor Coleman, the previous mayor of St. Paul, came out and said it was a sin what they did by building that Interstate 94, and it was wrong, and it's had devastating consequences, and the city must face that reality and make those wrongs right. And that's one of the things the city is working on this day, is to see what does that mean for that wrong to be made right. So that's what I have for you today. I don't know if Dr. Koen, you have anything else to add?
No, the only thing I'm going to add to that is think about what wealth is. Think about how people get wealth. And think about school funding. How do schools get funded? And then when we talk about what's happening with Rondo and what's happening with the rest of the redlining that we'll talk about later, we'll see why that's important and why race plays a role. Have a great weekend. I will see you guys on Monday.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So I'll look at my schedule for next week. Okay, what happened? I was thinking maybe Tuesday. I'll look at my schedule. Is there a day that works better?
you? Tuesday would work great. Yeah, and.
Okay. Well, let me see. Monday might.
Okay. Like I said, we're modular, so we'll I appreciate you.
Wonderful. Yeah.
And I'm glad that you could dovetail right off the race of power of the illusions.
No, these are gonna, these really connect well.
Yep.
So go ahead. So there's a couple of places that I live in White Bear, also kind of further away. That I live by a couple of places that I can volunteer at. Does it have to be through the Frogtown?
We need to clear that through that guy.
So we've cleared it through me. So all you need to do is fill out the form, the hours on the form. So
Okay. I'll need to get you. You'll need to email me to get on that list.
Okay.
Right now, I only have emails from those who are working in Frogtown. So just email me. Say, please put me on the service learning hours. Perfect. Then you're on that list.
Did everyone else hear that?
Yeah, I was gonna say the question.
Yeah. Just email me. Say, I'm in education. So of course, I need to be part of the tracking for hours. The email for everyone else already went out. I'll just forward that to you today, and then you fill it out and you'll get the emails.
Do you know about or I'm curious about the house that people live in Frogtown through?
Yeah, the fuel house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about that a little bit?
Yeah. What would you like to know? Or
I was talking to someone about it last year. Elaine, I forget her last name. But I was like intrigued about it, and then I, without knowing, signed up for the Urban Homeworks service learning, and I've seen the signs out, and I just like.
So it's in collaboration with Urban Homeworks.
Yeah.
So John, have you met John yet?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So start talking to John. He runs the Urban Neighborhood program.
Yeah. I talked to him about it a little bit on Wednesday. He didn't really know like how I could get involved and like thinking about kind of thinking about like if I would want to do that, and, like how I would be able to, or even like if I'm able to do that, like how.
So we will be taking applications here at the beginning of the spring semester.
Okay.
What you do is you live in the house, you're an urban neighbor.
Yeah.
So that means like once a month is part of their learning community.
Yeah, you kind of talked about that with the doodle thing.
And then you also do, you take 2 classes. They're 1 credit courses.
Okay.
I think they're 1 credit, maybe 2 credit courses. Professor Amy White will be the professor.
Okay.
And it's Intentional Urban Living 1 and then Intentional Urban Living 2.
Okay.
1's in the fall, 2's in the spring. Okay. And they really are integrate your work with urban homeworks, living in the neighborhood, and also your own professional, personal interests.
Yeah.
Come meld together in this course.
Cool.
First semester is more exploratory. Second semester is more off of that information that you learn, kind of getting connected to a community organization and making some kind of contribution.
Okay.
To that organization.
And do you think that would be like those classes, would that be something I'd be able to do while student teaching? Or is that?
They all happen on the, I think, I talked to Amy about that, but in the past, they happened in the evenings.
Okay.
And they happen on the weekends.
Perfect.
So they're not like a, 8 o'clock class on campus.
Yeah.
They're always usually in the neighborhood on the weekends. They walk around.
Cool.
Who are in the house.
Cool.
So I definitely think student teaching, you would be able to.
Yeah.
And we're wanting to, you being a student teacher, Kaisa, if you know Kaisa, she's an education major.
Okay.
She's been living in the house. And that model of having teachers live in communities before they teach in the communities is a really beneficial model.
And I'm receiving a grant right now that I say like I have to work in a low income environment, like first 4 years after I graduate. So I think that would be perfect to like live in it now and then like kind of get used to it and
build some networks.
Yeah, networks and connections.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of wonderful possibilities
Cool.
there. So send me an email.
Okay.
And actually, do you have my email?
From the Google form, I probably have it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll just give you my card.
Okay,
too.
cool.
And then I'll send you some more specific. We have a brochure.
Okay,
Send
cool.
me that brochure, and then I'll also make sure to get you to Professor Amy White.
Okay.
She's the one who's teaching the
Great.
course. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Andre, I gotta head out.
Yes, sir.
But is there anything that you need from me as far as?
I don't think so, but I do want to talk about spring.
Yeah.
So I don't want to clamor like I did this last.
Yeah, okay.
This last time. So let me know when I need to be active in getting my students ready to go.
So for spring semester, I would love to like the week of January 18th.
Okay.
If we could email them. Yeah, so in 2 weeks, if we could email the class, to say, hey, here are the classes of service learning classes. It's the same content that we emailed out to these guys. And then in there, I'd have some deadlines for when they would get signed up. And then I think it is like the second week of class, the 7th of February, if I'm remembering right, is when I would connect students to their sites. And the following week is when they would do their orientations. Okay. So it's like technically the third week of class, they would be doing orientations. The classes start out on Wednesday, so it's half a week or something. Yeah, so 2.5 weeks in, they can start doing their orientation.
And I also need some guidance from you about when I should check in on students.
Yeah, so I kind of, for like pre-semester, if I were doing service learning, I would have multiple grade points, right? So by this point, you should have this many hours in. By this point, you should have that many hours in. If you don't, you're going to get docked accordingly.
Right.
I talked to a professor yesterday who she actually grades students every week. So she has their hours and their reflections linked together.
Well, I'm more concerned with their performance at the site than I am necessarily the hours that they're getting. So, so for example, I had 3 young people who didn't perform well at their site.
Yeah.
They also didn't perform well in the class. So it's not.
So so
that's the part that I was.
So we're needing to figure out better feedback loops. So what we were doing this last semester is calling sites or emailing sites once every 2 weeks. What I'm finding is that sites typically, in those communications, just say, yeah, everything's fine.
Yeah, because it's quick. It's easier to do that.
Yeah. So,
and then at the end they go,
oh yeah, but yeah, right. So that's a little bit right. So what and you're not the only professor who brought this up. Okay. Amy White brought this up too to me just a couple days ago. Okay. So I gotta think creatively. I'm thinking that maybe what we could do is instead of having those surveys at the end of the semester, do them maybe mid-semester.
Okay.
So that would help us. Yeah, so just asking organizations, give us feedback on your students now. At the end of the semester, we'll just ask them to give us feedback to their hours. Yeah. So it's more of that at the end. But maybe mid-semester, ask them, how are these students performing? Yeah. Are they communicating? Are they responsive? And then I would share that information with you guys.
Yeah, because that's I can do something with. The other thing I was like, because I thought it was just me that they weren't performing well. But it's out the world, which is worse because I can handle the embarrassment. I don't, So,
and part of this, I'm asking community organizations, you got to give us feedback.
Yeah.
Right. So I can't be responsive to something that I don't know that's happening. Right. So we're going to keep having, reaching out to those organizations once every 2 weeks.
Okay.
But I'm thinking about maybe mid-semester asking them to give more concrete feedback.
Yeah.
Or if you have ideas about how to do this.
No, I think that's probably the easiest for them.
Yeah, I'm trying not to burden them with too much feedback.
Yeah,
but
nobody wants more. Oh, this is, I just discovered this today. Let me show you this real quick. So what did Staten say to Adam that encouraged them to do what God told them not to do?
That's a good question. Wisdom, wasn't it? Was it about knowledge?
So he said that you will be.
Yeah.
That's what he said, right? What they didn't realize is that he's a tricker. He's a master tricker, right? He's a trickery. That's what he does, right? He said they would be this. They didn't realize that they were this. right? I just saw that today. I was there it is.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, so they said they would do this, but they didn't realize they were already that.
Which if you have a firm foundation in that, you don't have that anxiety to be. I'm good as I am.
We're good as we are. But we don't have to change. We don't have to pierce. We don't have to tattoo. We don't have to cover. I mean, we can if we want to. We don't have to.
No, we have a firm identity.
Firm. So,
I like that.
So I just hit that. That just hit me today. I was like, oh, that's good.
Yeah, that's really good.
All right.
Yeah, no, so I would send something to you the 16th.
Okay.
15th or 16th. That would have all the details. And then if you could send it out to your students for spring semester, and then that email would have all the dates and the details for them to get signed up for that spring semester. And then we could talk about when it would be good for me to visit class.
Yeah. And do you have curriculum pieces that you'd like for me? Because we're starting so far in advance, I can now put some of that stuff directly in.
Yeah, so why don't I share a folder with you that I shared with some other professors that have some videos and other resources that help students get a good understanding of the neighborhood. So it's, some of it would be like what I showed them this morning, but also there's like a 20-minute documentary that's really nice that kind of lays out this history.
So I did some work with the Summit University Neighborhood Association, did some training.
Yeah.
I didn't know, and I can't remember if it was through my research or through the conversation, but the fact that 94 goes down, it's in a dip, was a concession.
Yeah.
Because it was going to be on an eye level. So it was a concession to dip it down and to separate those streets. And I was like,
oh. Which today might actually come back to be good for the community because you're talking about a land bridge. And because it's down, they're able to put kind of a cap on it. That's part of the work that Marvin Anderson and Reconnecting Rondo is doing, is they're talking about the concept of a land bridge and how that might be one positive solution. Now that, but yeah, so we'll see how that all forms. But yeah, no, there's the History Museum, not the museum, the History Center.
Theater.
They did a play on Rondo last year. We took students to it, and it was fascinating.
Oh, wow.
About it was all about the construction of 94.
Okay.
And I don't know how to get. It was a play, you know. They recorded everything. But it was a really rich history, talking about exactly what you're talking about there. How did this interstate get built?
Yeah.
Concessions were made, and how were homes stolen from people. It was, pretty amazing.